Hello everyone and welcome to the Thank Goddess podcast. It's Danny here, your host. Today we are going to be speaking about a book which I love. Well, it's actually a series of books, and you may have heard of the title Power vs. Force by David R. Hawkins. So this is not necessarily the book I'll be referring to, but in all of his books he speaks about this map of consciousness. So today I wanted to go through the map of consciousness and explain what it is in my own interpretation. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't. I'm not claiming to be an expert in this topic, but I have personally found David's work really helpful for my own spiritual evolution. And what I love about it is it kind of blends the spiritual world with science. I really find it an amazing way to integrate spiritual concepts, because I think sometimes when we speak about anything spiritual related, we're talking about something that's intangible, that we can't see, right? And so I love when people can kind of weave in the material world with the spiritual, which I believe they are one. I think we're doing humanity and the world a disservice when we say that science and spirituality are two separate things. I do believe that they are one thing, and I really appreciate people that have kind of been pioneers in this way to merge the two fields together. And I think David has done a lot for humanity with his research. He uses, probably those of you that listen to this podcast, you might have heard of kinesiology before. It's something that's quite common in the spiritual New Age community. Kinesiology is basically, it's a study of muscles and their movements. And so essentially what kinesiology suggests, and this is something that I definitely feel is true for me, is that the body has its own intelligence, right? There's a lot of wisdom that we can tap into by using the body, and muscle testing is a way to, I suppose, tap into the subconscious mind. We can tap into the subconscious beliefs based on how the body responds to certain things, to certain stimuli. And so the idea with kinesiology is that whenever the body contracts, that means on a subconscious level that the body is informing us that this stimuli or this information is false. And when the body expands, then that is when the body's telling us that this information is true, or absolute truth, right? Because truth can be subjective. So anyway, that's kind of just a little explanation of kinesiology, but I'm not going to go into great detail about it. Maybe one day I'll have a kinesiologist on the podcast and we can kind of dive deeper into it, because I'm not an expert, but I definitely believe that the body has its own intelligence, and science is just kind of catching up to that now. Like, we're starting to learn that our body is not just this stupid machine that's just doing whatever it feels like. Like, it's actually a really important messenger which can tell us a lot about what's going on within us, particularly in terms of our psychology. So that is what Dr. David Hawkins has based his research upon. So he's a spiritual teacher, a consciousness researcher, and he was a psychiatrist for a long period of time. So like I said, he merges the science world with the spiritual world, which I love. And today we're going to be talking about this map of consciousness which he has created, which is essentially a scale from 0 to 1,000, where it basically is a scale from 0 to 1,000, 1,000 being enlightenment. So this is kind of the map of how we humans can reach our full potential. So David, in his books, he says that the people that, as humans, that we're calibrating at 1,000, the level 1,000, which is the peak, which is the pinnacle of enlightenment, were, say, Jesus, Krishna, Buddha. So these people were basically showing us what is possible for the human, right? And we can exist anywhere on that scale from 0 to 1,000. Now 1,000, obviously we're talking Jesus, we're talking Krishna, so I want to say that most of us are probably not at the 1,000 level. We're actually much lower on the scale, and that's what we're going to be diving into today. We're going to talk about the emotions that kind of correlate with each with each level, and kind of what that suggests about where you're at, your level of perception. Now, how David has kind of created this, what he calls the calibration point. So you'll be aware, right, that we all are constantly moving through different emotions each day, each month, each week. We go through different things. Sometimes we're really happy, sometimes something will happen and we're really sad. We can go through stages of grief or through anger. If we're healing trauma, things might come up and we could be in a state of, you know, victim consciousness for a while, and then maybe we have a really positive thing happen and we're in a state of bliss and happiness, or maybe we have like a really profound spiritual experience, like maybe a near-death experience, or we do a really amazing breathwork session and we reach a really high state of consciousness. So the calibration point is basically the medium where you are majority of the time kind of the point where you're sitting at. So based on all your experiences, all these different emotions that you experience throughout your day, what's your medium? What's the average that you are vibrating at or you're calibrating at? That's your calibration point. And obviously we're here to evolve and we're here to grow, all of us. I believe all of us are on a spiritual journey, regardless if we're aware of it or not. And the point of existence is to, I suppose, move up on this level of consciousness, to become more awake, to become the more awake that we are the witness to what it is that we're witnessing, if that makes sense, to become aware of our pure consciousness. And this is why Jesus is a master and at 1,000, because what Jesus was teaching us was essentially how to awaken the Christ within us, which is the unity consciousness, right? And Jesus, his last name was not Christ. His name was not Jesus Christ. His surname's Christ. No, Jesus was Christ, yes, but he was saying that I am Christ, but you are also Christ. You have the potential to be as I am, to awaken to everything that I am. He was just showing us that this is humanly possible while we're here in this time-space reality on planet Earth. And so this map of consciousness is kind of, in a way, like this tangible way of seeing how we can raise our vibration, or we can raise our calibration point to get to a place where we do awaken our Christ nature and we do remember who we are and self-realize and self-actualize and Neurosis, know thyself, and whatever word you want to use. But essentially this is what this map is for. And how amazing is it that we have this tool where we can like tangibly see it. So today I'm going to go through all the different points that David speaks about, all the different calibration points, starting from, it starts at 20 and we're going to move up to 1,000, which is enlightenment. And one thing I want to mention here also is that David says the higher we move up in calibration, this is going to determine how much power we have. And this is why his book Power vs. Force is really amazing, because it describes to us what is true power. And he speaks about true power being, you know, an internal thing. It's not something that we exert onto others. We often think of like the government as a powerful force, but actually, you know, maybe you'll understand it as we go through this episode. The government uses a lot of tactics to disempower people and to keep people in victim consciousness, and that actually is force, and it sits on a lower vibration than power, where you could say Jesus was someone at 1,000 who had a lot of power, and that power didn't come by exerting himself onto others, right? It came by him knowing who he was and standing in his truth. And still to this day, like, you know, however many years later after Jesus's crucifixion, we're still talking about Jesus. He's still such a significant character in the human story, and that really goes to show how much power he truly had. Like, even though they tried everything to destroy him, we're still talking about him. Like, you know, he has a whole religion which is centered around him, regardless if it's actually in alignment with his message or not. I won't go into that, but the fact that he's so relevant today shows how powerful he truly was, as was Buddha, as was Krishna. Like, we're still talking about these avatars in today's modern day context. That is true power. And the last thing I'll mention before I get into all the calibration points is that David Hawkins talks about how 200 is considered a critical point. And he speaks about this because anything below 200 is basically anti-life. It's destructive and it doesn't support life. Where anything above 200 on the scale, 200 to 1,000, supports life because it's in the direction of truth, absolute truth, right? Whereas anything below 200 is essentially it's ego consciousness. So that's why I say it's anti-life. It's because the ego, I'm going to say based on A Course in Miracles, which I study, A Course in Miracles describes the ego as the belief in separation. So the ego essentially wants to remove itself from its source. And so by doing so, that's why I say it's anti-life. It's not supportive of life because God is life. Like, our source, universe, whatever word you want to use, is life affirming. That's what gives us life, right? Our bodies wouldn't animate if it didn't have life within it. And that life is the life force. It's God, it's source within us that animates our bodies. But the ego belief system is that I am separate from that life force. I am separate from God, which we can never be separate from that God, from our source. Otherwise, we wouldn't even be alive. But we believe this, that we are the doers of our reality. We believe that we are separate from everyone else. We are separate from God. And that actually causes suffering. That causes us pain. And it actually... it's what David explains is falsehood. It's false. It's a lie. It's an illusion. As the Course explains, it's actually an illusion, which we believe because of our conditioning and all this indoctrination we receive as children. And because we're constantly like feeding this lie, this lie of separation, that I'm separate, then this is what leads, again, to suffering, to illness, to all of these things that we deem as bad and wrong in the world. It is all at cause of the ego, or, you know, the collective ego within all of us, because we're all contributing to the whole, the collective consciousness. And so what I love about David's work is really about essentially moving from ego consciousness, which is below 200, and moving to that critical point of 200 and above, which is really when we start moving out of the ego consciousness into empowerment, into sovereignty, and into self-realization and enlightenment. And that is how we're going to heal the world, by more of us taking responsibility, healing, and awakening to who we truly are. Which is why I'm excited to do this episode. So with that said, let's get into all the different calibration points and understand in greater detail what they are. So we're going to start at the bottom of the map of consciousness. So the first one I want to talk about is 20. So the calibration point of 20, which is the lowest according to David Hawkins, and that level is shame. And I found it quite interesting that if you look at the lowest levels that you can feel, the lowest calibration points according to the map of consciousness, you have 20, which is shame, and 30, which is guilt. Now, I find this interesting because I think a lot of us would, I know for myself, I was surprised to see that. But once I kind of, sat with the map of consciousness and I really started understanding it at greater detail, and even looking at my own life, because I have experienced a lot of shame and guilt in my life, I think many of us have, I started to see how anti-life and how, I want to say the word like soul-destroying shame and guilt can be on the human spirit. It can really destroy us. It can really and when I say destroy, I don't think that there's anything that can ever remove us from our source. I think anything we're able to heal in this life. We can heal anything. That is truly possible. But shame and guilt are very, very low vibrational, and they can keep us in this place where, where we inhibit ourselves from raising our level of consciousness, and can keep us in a really dark place. Shame, you think of shame. Now, what's interesting, a lot of people will put shame and guilt in the same category, but I think the one differentiation to make between shame and guilt is shame is I am bad, whereas guilt is often I've done something bad, right? So that's kind of the difference, and that's why shame is a level below guilt, because it's like I've internalized. It's not that I've just done something bad, like I've robbed a bank or something like that and I feel guilty for it. It's I am bad. And a lot of shame comes from abuse, particularly sexual abuse, that can really distort someone's perception of reality, particularly if it's in childhood. And this is something that I'm really passionate in speaking about and healing within people, because I've had my own abuse throughout my life, and it warped my perception for a long period of time. And what David Hawkins speaks about is that where we sit on our calibration point, so remember I talked about the average that we are kind of vibrating at, that we're calibrating at, that becomes an attractive field, and we attract situations, people that calibrate at that same level. So this is where shame and guilt can become very, very toxic, in the sense it can become a cycle, whereas if you're not healing from it, you can attract more and more situations or people that are operating at that low level, right? And then that can further traumatize you, and it can just keep you in this vicious cycle. And this is why healing is so important, and it's important to have conversations like this so we can actually address it at its root cause. So you think of shame, let's get back into shame and differentiate it from guilt. Shame, I mentioned about the assault, particularly in childhood. You think of shame is often associated with humiliation. You think about people's body posture. They might be hanging, their shoulders are hunched over. They got their head hanging low. David speaks about how shame can produce neurosis in a person. So you see this a lot with people that have been abused as children. It actually fragments their personality. They can, because obviously you can imagine if someone's abusing you and they're bigger than you, they're older than you, they might be a caregiver. You might not have the ability to fight back in that situation. And so your body has to survive in some way. And sometimes what it does is it will use the mind to kind of disassociate, to leave the body, to create different personas to survive, right? And so this is where it can create a lot of mental health issues, anxiety, just any kind of neurosis within the psychology. David Hawkins says this is a very dangerous level, because at this level of shame, often because someone has such low self-esteem, they can either become very cruel to themselves, right? Believing that they deserved somehow to be punished, like that they're so bad, that they're so just shameful that they deserve this, and it almost creates like this self-loathing. And they either can internalize it, like I said, become very cruel to themselves, or if that pain feels too difficult to feel within themselves, they can project that out onto other people, and they can become very cruel and then go, it's like the person who's abused becomes the abuser, right? Because it doesn't know how to handle that low vibration of shame. Doesn't feel good in the body because it's so far removed from, if enlightenment is that oneness with God, 20 is kind of the opposite side of that. It's ignorance. It's I've forgotten my connection to Source God. And that's why David speaks about how it can be quite dangerous, because people at this level, they often can end up being serial killers. They can be, abusers. They're the people that end up in the prison systems. And I think it's so easy, particularly in the way that the level of consciousness that we are at collectively, it's so easy to look at people that, you know, do these crimes, these horrendous crimes, and judge them and say they deserve to die, capital punishment, they deserve to be in jail for locked up. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't be accountable for their actions, but I also think that we've lost this, or we haven't been taught how to extend compassion for people in this circumstance, because no one who's truly living in love and who's truly healed would go out and hurt other people. No one who's living in love and complete harmony and happiness and joy and bliss would go out and harm others. So I think we have to understand that people that are hurting people hurt people hurt people. And again, I'm not trying to make excuses for people's behavior. Trust me, I'm not doing that at all. But I think our current justice system, are we really, if we're just like locking away the bad guys and they come out of jail and then they do the same thing again and they do it to their children or whatnot, it's just like this vicious cycle. It's like, are we coming up with solutions to actually heal this, like to actually treat this at the root cause? You know, can we teach people maybe in the prison systems to study A Course in Miracles and learn forgiveness or healing trauma and things like that? I don't know. Like, I just think there must be a better way, because as long as we're pointing the finger at the other, I just think we're just perpetuating the cycle. And I've kind of gone on a bit of a tangent here, but what I want to say is that yeah, I don't know, hurt people, but healed people heal people. And that's why it's so important that we do this work and we elevate our consciousness, because the more of us that elevate our consciousness, the more we're going to have solutions to actually solve this issue in such an impactful way. And that's what we need to see in the world today, rather than just judging and pointing the finger at one another. We're not getting anywhere with that. So moving up a level, we're going to guilt. So guilt is very, you know, closely tied with shame, but it's not as low. And I think the reason for that, like I said, guilt is more like I've done something bad. I find guilt very interesting when you look at it from a religious point of view. Like you think of, I was raised Catholic, and there was definitely this whole idea of sin and the original sin, and I had to get baptized because, you know, I was born a sinner apparently. And then you have, like, I remember I had to do my first confession, I think. So when I was how old was I? Would have been, I don't know, maybe like 12, something like that. I had to do like a confession and talk to the priest and like say what I was sorry for and confess to this man behind, you know, the box. I don't know if you've ever been to a Catholic church, but I literally had to do that. And it's like this idea that we're bad, you know, like our humanity is bad. Even the fact we christen babies, it's like we're saying that there's something wrong with the baby. I mean, what's more pure than a baby that's like fresh from the womb? Like, I don't know what is more godlike than that. And yet the Christian indoctrination or the Catholic indoctrination is that, no, you're a sinner. And people that really fall victim to that, to actually believe that and internalize that, and this goes back many generations, so some of this is like ancestrally like hardwired in our psychology. I know for myself, I've been healing a lot of this, but there comes a lot of guilt, you know, subconscious guilt that's there, even particularly for women. If you were raised in the Catholic Church, there's a lot of I want to say patriarchy within it, and there's shaming of like having sex out of wedlock. And I know people that are in an abusive relationship in a marriage, and they don't want to get divorced because it's against religion, you know, so they'll stay in an abusive relationship where they're getting treated horribly, and they won't divorce their partners because they really believe it's a sin. And this has been such a way to keep people in disempowerment, because guilt, like what I'm saying here, it's at the level of 30. If enlightenment, if Jesus is at 1,000, guilt telling people that they're sinners is at 30. That's a very huge gap between Jesus and what religion really propagates. Like, just think about that for a second. Like, is Jesus's message really in alignment with what's being taught in religion? I mean, I won't get into that. I've done many episodes before and you probably have heard my standpoint on that. But it's something to think about. Like, why is guilt so low? And it really, anything that's at this low vibration is inhibiting us from our personal growth, from our evolution, from knowing who we are, right? So it really makes you question religion when you look at it from that point of view. The dangerous part about guilt as well is, like, yes, we can feel guilty within ourselves, but we can also project that guilt onto other people, kind of like the shame thing. And we can end up projecting it in a sense, like, if say, for example, and you've probably heard or seen people like this that are really, like, you know, fundamentalist when it comes to religion, and then they've gone and killed in the name of religion, or maybe they've felt so guilty for their lust for this woman, maybe like a woman who's very wears provocative clothes, if you will, and, you know, someone who's very religious could look at that person and get so angry because of the way they feel guilty about having lust for that woman, and then go and attack her, say horrible things about her, or even physically violate her or kill someone, even out of guilt, out of their own guilt. Like, that's how dangerous this emotion can be when it's not healed. So that's 20 and 30. So this is, like, yeah, the lowest of the low that we can possibly be calibrating at. And remember how I said it's also your attractive field. So if you're collaborating at that point, you're going to be attracting people of that same vibration to you, and situations, and because everything is just affirming our beliefs, right? Truth is subjective. We're all perceiving reality different, and that's very much what this map of consciousness is, that where you're calibrating is going to determine your viewpoint of reality. And so if you're operating at this lower vibrational point, this calibration point, you're probably going to see reality very differently to someone who's at the level of 200 or 250, for example. You're going to have a very different experience. Let's keep going because there's a lot to get through. The next one at 50 is apathy. So apathy is, you know, you think of someone who's homeless. It's someone who's kind of got lost hope. They've lost hope. There's despair. It's like, I've given up on life. Like, what's the point? Maybe someone who's grown up in poverty. They haven't known anything else their whole lives. You can think about people that are, like, chronically ill. You know, I know my grandfather, he was diagnosed with MS, I believe, in his 40s. And before that, he was very, very independent. He was an engineer. He would go for runs. And MS really destroyed him because he became just bedridden, and he couldn't do anything. He couldn't eat by himself. He couldn't go to the toilet by himself. He literally had to have a caretaker, which was my grandmother, you know, for the rest of his life. He died quite young, and he couldn't do anything for himself, and he got very frustrated with that. And there was a level of apathy about him, like that, you know, almost like giving up on life in a way, because he couldn't do what he once could do. And so that's kind of the level of apathy. So that's at 50. It's also can feel like you feel like a burden to other people. So that's why I say, like, chronic illness, something like MS is a good example of apathy, depending on the person's psychology, how they deal with the illness. The next one after that at 75, so we're still under 100 here. So these are quite low vibrational emotions to be feeling, or calibration points. The next one is grief. So grief at 75, and you might be surprised to see that grief is not, like, lower. You might, like, I was definitely surprised to see shame and guilt at the very bottom, which is below grief and apathy. So grief, you know, you can understand. I think most of us have experienced grief at one point or another, some more significantly than other people. Grief is when you experience a loss, and it's almost like this depression, like I can't get back what I've lost, right? And I think it's important. Remember how I spoke before about how we're all going to move through highs and lows? And so this is not to say that if you've lost, you know, your child or your loved one, that you can't grieve, that you can't be in this emotion. This is not what we're talking about here with the calibration points. What we're talking about here, why grief is quite a low vibration, is because it's more when we get stuck in the grief, when maybe someone's died 10 years ago, or we've lost something, or maybe we used to be an athlete and then we had an injury, and then we've, you know, it's been 10 years and I'm still holding on to the loss of my sports career, right? And I can't move past it. I can't accept what has happened. I'm holding on to the past. This is the grief that I'm talking about, like constant regret, constant remorse of what happened, what was, what could have been, right? And people that get stuck in this level at 75, it's almost like they perceive reality just from this level of sadness, like everything appears sad, like. But I think what's important to note, and what David speaks about, is that grief is actually above apathy. So say, for example, someone loses someone who's, you know, a loved one, a significant loved one. If sometimes when people go through like a loss like that, they can almost become numb. They can become like just hopeless, like I give up on life. And so what David explains is that if someone gets to the point of grief, say they were in apathy, if they get to the point of grief where they start maybe crying or mourning what they have lost, that's actually a level up from the apathy. So that actually means that someone is, when they start crying, when they start mourning, that actually suggests they are on the healing journey from that apathy or from that shame. Even someone who's maybe been abused their whole life and they're living in shame or guilt, getting to that point where they start grieving for that loss of innocence, or that or the perceived loss of innocence, or that loss of being taken care of, or the pain that was inflicted upon them. If they start grieving that is a step up from that lower vibration. So I think what I really want to iterate here is that there is no wrong emotion. Like it's all just essentially vibration, right? And it's like we're just making peace with where we are, and then seeing like, okay, what's the next step to raise my level of consciousness? We're not going to go from level 50 to 1,000 in one day, right? We're not saying you have to like awaken to the level of Jesus in one day. But knowing where you are, like, oh, I'm stuck in this negative emotion, even if you're going through a period of grief, knowing like, okay, maybe I'm just going to feel this for the next 3 months. I'm going to be in this pain. I'm going to be in the cave. I'm going to feel it, but I'm going to get out of this point eventually. I'm going to start to move forward, and we're going to talk about what's the next calibration point after grief. So I just want to say that there's kind of like a stepping stone to moving to higher octaves, to higher levels of consciousness, and we need to just be compassionate with ourselves and others about where we are, and understand we're not going to go from, you know, Rome wasn't built in a day. So making peace with where we are, and like, okay, what's the next step? So now we get to 100. So 100 is fear. So fear, this is a big one, I think, collectively. I think, you know, the media definitely plays into this one a lot. Definitely the government, you know, we saw what happened during 2020. That was, fear. It became widespread. Fear spreads. It's very quick to spread. And fear keeps us stuck. Fear inhabits personal growth. It puts us in a fight or flight state, and we can see a lot of the world is in this state. Most of us, if we're in the rat race, we're operating from a level of survival. How am I going to get my needs met? I need to make this money to pay my bills, to pay the tax, to buy food, to provide for my children, blah, blah, blah. And we're in that state of survival. And like I said, it can keep us stuck. And this is kind of the powers that be, the powers that were, they like to keep us in this level. That's why I really encourage you to switch off the news. Be very intentional about how you start your morning. Like, you know, if the news is making you afraid of, you know, particularly at the moment we've got this whole drone scenario, like if that is causing you fear, turn it off. Turn it off. Do not put your attention on it, because it's not serving you. It's keeping you in this low level of calibration. It is inhabiting your growth, your personal evolution, your enlightenment, your self-realization. It's inhabiting you from obtaining the life that you want. So if it is causing you distress, if you're getting nervous about something, if you're watching these things, and literally the media is purposely feeding us this to keep us in a lower vibration, because guess what, everybody? If we are operating below 200, and I don't know if I mentioned this before, but when David Hawkins was doing his research, so I believe this might have been in the 90s or early 2000s, 85% of the population is below the critical point of 200. So below. So most people are below this level of 200. And guess what? People that are below 200 are easier to control, easier to manipulate, right? It's so much easier to control the masses when they are still operating at this lower level of consciousness, which is why I say, if you are being disturbed by what is on the news, which is what is going on globally, turn it off. It's none of your business. It's none of our business. Let's focus on what's around us. What can you be grateful for? Because that will uplift your level of consciousness, and it will help you to step into empowerment and to grow and to evolve, which is what we're all here to do. We're not here to be operating in fight or flight at all. Okay, so we really need to work on healing our nervous system, regulating our nervous system. Okay, being out in nature. What helps me to relax? What helps me to be calm, right? Meditating each morning. Are you starting your morning scrolling on Instagram? Do you know how damaging that is to your psychology? That you know, you're overstimulating the brain with all these images, good or bad, it doesn't matter, right? All of these things, what are you putting into your body? We really need to start coming back to what helps me to regulate my nervous system. How can I slow down? How can I come back to myself? How can I come back to what's around me, my surroundings? Okay, I'm okay right now. Yes, there's wars going on in the world. Yes, there's drones flying in the sky, whatever. But right now I am safe. And what can I do that helps me affirm that to myself? Okay, really important to rising above these lower levels of consciousness. Okay, enough about fear. I think we've got enough about fear. But what I want to say also is, if you're operating in a state of fear, anxiety, worried about the future all the time, you're depleting your energy, you're depleting your life force, and you're depleting the life force of the collective consciousness even, right? It's anti-life. Okay, you think you're in survival, you think you're doing what's right to survive in this life, but you're actually depleting your energy. Okay, moving on. 125, so we're moving above 100 now. 125, but we're still below 200. Now we get to desire. Okay, so this is where I think a lot of humans are at the moment. I think most people are between the levels of 100 to 200, as you'll probably see. So 125, we have desire. So desire is not necessarily the worst thing in the world, because as David Hawkins explains, when you desire something, when you want something, right? Like if I want to build a business because I don't want to work for my company anymore, right? That can be a good thing, because it can get me motivated to, you know, work towards something that I want. If I desire like a really big house with a nice pool and whatever, then that might make me, you know, work towards creating a more abundant life for myself, making more money, building a business, whatever. So it can actually help us to start moving out of that fear. It's like desiring something can help us move towards something better. I think a lot of the law of attraction's teachings feed into this desire. A lot of advertising feeds into this desire. And what I want to say also, like I said, desire is not the lowest vibration to feel, but it is disempowerment, right? Because you're still seeking something outside of you to make you happy. Empowerment, the level of 200, is when you start becoming self-resourced, when you start realizing that everything you need is within you, as Jesus did. He didn't, like I said, he wasn't exerting force onto others. He knew that the kingdom existed within. He always says the kingdom is within you, right? So that's true power. So desire is still low vibrational because we're seeking something outside of ourselves to make us happy. And this is the trap of desire. The reason why it is low vibrational is because we can get addicted to our desires, right? It could be, you know, you think a relationship's going to make you happy, and then you just keep jumping from relationship to relationship to relationship, and you think, oh, it's them, because maybe, say, you're really excited in the beginning of the relationship, you know, you got all the chemicals going off, you're in that honeymoon stage, and then reality sinks in and you're like, oh, this person isn't who I thought they were. And then you say, oh, it's them, I'm going to break up with them, and then I'm going to jump onto the next person who excites me and creates all those hormones and blah, blah, blah. And you could literally, your whole life, and you see this with people, they're literally jumping from relationship to relationship to relationship, and they never can settle down because they haven't realized that it's them that has the issue. Like, they're the one who's addicted to this, what they perceive as love, quote unquote, and they're the ones that have to really look at themselves and realize they're seeking something in someone else, when really true happiness, joy, inner peace comes from within, right? And so that's the trap of desire. Now let's move up to 150, which is anger. So anger is actually above desire, which is surprising. I think a lot of people would think anger is very low vibrational. Anger is actually a lot higher than, you know, your shame, your guilt, your desire, your apathy, grief. Anger is actually pretty high up there. Again, it's still below 200, but it is higher up on the scale. Now the reason for that is anger helps us to move. And also remember how desire is below anger. So I think for a lot of us, we get to this point, particularly like even law of attraction teachings, and you're like, you know, in the beginning, you're like, oh yeah, I really want to manifest this thing, and I want this thing, I want this relationship, I want this career, I want this blah, 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 I want this money. You get to a point in your own evolution. Not everyone will get here in this lifetime, but I think if you're probably listening to this podcast, you're probably at that point or getting to that point where you know, you've been trying to get all these things in the material world and you're like, I'm actually not happy. Like, I get the thing, I'm happy for like a month, I'm happy for a year, and then I fall back into this slump, and then it's like the next thing, and then you get the thing, and then you fall back into that, okay, I'm not happy still. Like, and you just feel frustrated. Maybe it's either like you're stuck in this rat race where you're trying to seek things for pleasure, and then you end up suffering because of it. So there's like this frustration being built. Or maybe you want something and then you can't get it, and then that causes frustration. So this is where anger comes in, because that anger is actually a signal from our body that something needs to change, something needs to move, right? And so that's why anger can be constructive or it can be deconstructive, because it can help us move in a positive way. You know, like maybe I'm getting bullied at work every day and I start getting frustrated with my boss, and that anger that builds up within me, and then I finally like, you know what, I quit. And I quit because I'm so angry, and maybe I needed that boss to kind of bully me to make me so angry. Otherwise I would have never left my job, and that job was not in alignment with me. And now I'm opening up my energy field to attract the job that is for me, but I was too afraid to make that move. So sometimes anger can serve us in a really positive way, right? And we saw this even, say, For example, like the feminist movement, like women had to get really angry in order to rise up and say, you know what, it's not fair that we get treated like second-class citizens and we want equal rights to men. And so anger can actually be a really positive thing. But the thing is, we don't want to get stuck in the anger. This is the real thing with the calibration points. It's like anyone who's vibrating at like 150, or that's their point of their attractor field, it's like you're stuck in the anger. You can't move past the anger. It's like you see today the feminist movement from years ago, decades ago, where, it's been, 30, 40 years now, and women have a lot more rights today than they did back then. And you still see a lot of women that really are angry towards men, and they're still, even if they didn't grow up with the same oppression as these women who really did have the oppression, they're still really like, they're harboring this deep resentment, this anger towards the masculine, but it's not something that maybe they personally even experience for themselves. It's just like it's an ego attachment, right? So this is where it can become destructive, where you start seeing women emasculating men, right, based on their own unhealed wounds. And so this is where it can be destructive, that anger. So that brings me to the next one, and this is the last one before we get to the critical point of 200. And so 175, this is pride. So pride is just above anger, and pride is, a lot of us will think of it as like arrogance. It's when we get to this point of our self-esteem is rising. So this is actually really positive if you've been living in shame or guilt, to get to a place where you start becoming more arrogant, where you start becoming a bit more prideful and have this self-importance. That can actually be a really positive thing to pull us out of the lower vibrations, right? Grief, apathy. Pride is a lot higher. Because we start getting into what a lot of us refer to the ego as, when this inflated ego, right? I think I'm so important. We see a lot of politicians probably at this level of pride. But pride, David Hawkins talks about how pride is actually not power. It's still a low vibration. It's still ego, right? It's still there's still vulnerability with pride, because often people who are very arrogant, you might hear this, like they're overcompensating for something. It's often like a disguise for an insecurity that's within. So they have to, boast and present themselves as like really confident and, I'm so great, and show off with all of these things. But it's usually hiding a deeper insecurity within themselves. Like if you look at someone like Jesus, who was at 1,000, Jesus was never boasting about his connection with God. He was never, he didn't have a spiritual ego. He wasn't like, oh, you guys are so basic, like you don't get, these high advanced spiritual concepts. He was able to relate to people of all levels, depending, no matter where they were on their, on the scale of consciousness. Jesus was very compassionate. He wasn't judging people for where they were at. He didn't think he was so much better than people because he had all these spiritual powers. He was able to heal the sick. Like he wasn't boasting about it, right? It was like an inner confidence. And that's kind of the difference between power and force. And I think that's why I said earlier in the episode, we look at politicians and maybe celebrities as powerful figures, but a lot of them are actually, you can see they're like deeply insecure. That's why they have to present that they have all this money and they have all of this amazing, they have to wear all the designer clothes and whatnot. Not that any of it's wrong, but I find if you look deeper, it's actually coming from a level of insecurity. Because anyone who truly, knows their worth and knows who they are and knows that we're all one, there's no reason to show off or to brag or to, try to feel superior to others. This is always the ego. The ego always believes it's inferior, right? Or it believes it's superior to others. So it's one or the other. It's either going to play the inferior card or the superior card. Whereas enlightenment is to understand we're all one. We're all equal. There is no hierarchy. And I think, as you move up in consciousness, you realize that there is no hierarchy. And this can also be like, people that, deny, like if someone's listening to this episode and they're like, oh, it's so fluffy because it's like, it's spiritual. You know, people that kind of make fun. I get this a lot because I'm a very spiritual person, and people will make fun of me because I read astrology, and they'll be like, oh, I don't believe in astrology. It's crap. You know, I don't take it to heart. I'm like, whatever. I don't care if people don't believe in what I believe in. And I'm not saying you should, you know, believe whatever you want to believe. But that is, if you're very dismissive of other people's opinions, you know, even saying this political party is better than this political party, or this politician is bad, that's a level of pride, right? There's a level of arrogance, like I'm more righteous, like I know better than you. And that's what I want to say here. It's the ego. That's ego, right? Because the more you work your way up on the scale of consciousness, the more you are able to listen to other alternative perspectives. You're not polarized by opposites. You can say, yeah, okay, like they can have that viewpoint and I can have mine, and you can see things from different points of view, and you're not getting triggered by other different opinions to your own. Like, wouldn't that be nice if we could live in a world where everyone could have their opinions and we're not demonized for that? Like, even as someone, you know, just side note, like, I'm not anyone. I'm not like, I don't have a huge following online or not, but I produce a lot of content. I have my podcast, I have a YouTube channel, I create Instagram, TikTok, things like that. And even I get trolls and people hating on me for some of the stuff I say. They obviously got triggered by something I've said. And it's amazing how people feel righteous to go and, you know, attack people on the internet. Like, I personally watch a lot of content, and if I don't agree with something, I don't feel the need to go and attack that person for saying, you're wrong, this is my opinion, blah. You know, it's like, if something doesn't resonate with me, I can just turn it off, or I can go and watch something else or listen to something else. And it's just interesting that we live in a culture where people feel that their opinion is the most important thing, and that they have the right to go and tear people down because they have an opinion that's different to theirs. And again, I'm not saying my opinion is more righteous than anyone's, but what I really believe in is free speech, and I believe everyone has the right to their opinion. And I just think, like, wouldn't it be nice if we could live in a world where everyone could be free to express their opinion without getting attacked? That's all I'm saying. Anyway, let's move on now to 200. So this is the critical point. This is the point where we want to get humanity to, because remember I said before that 85%, and it's probably changed, it's probably increased a bit since then, but when David did his work, he said 85% of the human population is below 200. And so this is really where we want to start working towards, all of us, to try and get above this 200 level, and to help our brothers and sisters to rise to this 200 level, because we're not going to heal the world until all of us heal. We all have to pull our weight. It's not going to be one person comes and saves the day. We all have to do this together. This is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to raise the vibration of the earth and create solutions and heal and see, you know, a different world, 5D consciousness, the new earth, whatever you want to call it. We're going to do that by everyone pulling their weight and raising their level of consciousness to a higher calibration point. And 200 is that critical level. And so at the point of David's research, I believe he said that humanity as a collective was at the point of 204. Now, so from that, you can say, okay, we're above the critical point now. We might even be higher than 204, because this was probably, I don't know, early 2000s maybe, or 90s. Don't quote me on that. But it was a while ago. So I want to say that humanity has evolved since then. But remember what he said, that 85% of humanity is below 200. So the reason why the overall calibration point is at 204 is because, as David explains, one person who's at 1,000. So say, you know, when Jesus was on the planet, because Jesus was so high vibrational, he would have lifted the rest of humanity up in terms of the whole collective consciousness. Like people that are calibrating at a high level, they are doing a lot for humanity, even if they don't do any service in terms of like they're not in the public eye, even if they're just, you know, sitting on their meditation cushion each day. If they're operating at like 600, 700 plus, they are pulling the whole of humanity up in that scale of consciousness. They're doing a lot for humanity because everything is energy. We are all one, right? So that's how it works. So now let's talk about 200. So 200 is a point of courage. So this is where David says this is the point of empowerment, right? So this is when we start becoming supportive of life instead of anti-life, right? So we kind of start stepping out of the ego consciousness, and 200 is that tipping point. So like I said, this is where we want to get to and above. 200 is the point of, you know, accomplishment and determination. I think the big difference at the 200 point is where it's not to say you're not going to have challenges in your life. You're still going to have challenges, but you start seeing them more optimistically. Like you start seeing challenges as lessons. Like, you know, if you've ever gotten to the point where you're like, oh, like this bad thing happened, but I trust that it's happening for a reason, or maybe there's something for me to learn in this situation. So you're not, you know, if you're sitting at the level below 200, when something, an obstacle comes in your way, a sickness, maybe you have a car accident, you know, something goes wrong in your life, you're going to go into victim consciousness. Oh, poor me, life is hard, I'm so hard done by. It might even destroy you and completely throw you off your path for a while. Whereas someone at that 200 point, this is when something happens and they're like, you know what, okay, it's really crap what's happened to me. Maybe I've got to grieve. Maybe I've got to, you know, sit in this for a while. Maybe I need to go into the cave and feel my feelings. But I know that I will come out of this. Like this will not derail me. And that's the difference. That's why this 200 point is really critical, because this is when you start stepping into your true power, right? Your sovereignty. Like, I'm not going to be affected by the outside world. I'm the cause of my reality. I choose what kind of reality I want to experience for myself. So then we move on to 250, which is neutrality. So this is when we start getting into the heart chakra. I forgot to mention that all of these calibration points correlate with the chakra system. So courage, I believe, is the solar plexus. Whereas when we get to 250, this is when we get into the heart. So this is neutrality. So neutrality is when we start rising above duality and we stop kind of falling into polarization and start saying this is good, this is bad. And we kind of start, you know, I feel like this is when you kind of get to the point where you stop caring so much about the law of attraction. I feel like law of attraction is more 200 courage level, or even like desire and pride, like 150 or so to that 200 point. You're kind of in that law of attraction, like I can create my reality. When you get to, I think, that 250 level, this is when you kind of start rising a bit above the law of attraction, and you're like, you come to a point of acceptance, like it is what it is, like just trusting the flow of life. You know, if you lose your job, you're like, well, I'll get another one. Like you have that trust, you have that faith, you know that if something happens, you're going to be taken care of. It's like you're starting to develop this trust in life, in God, whatever you want to say. But there's almost like this inner confidence to you where you start just like moving with the flow, with the seasons of life. And you get to this point where you're not judgmental. You don't see things as, you know, good or bad, or like this is really, like this is an obstacle. You kind of come to this neutral place. And people, David says that people at this level are easy to get along with, they're safe to be around, and they're not interested in conflict or competition. And he also says people at 250 are very hard to control. So you can see why religion, the media, advertising, government, they don't want us to get to this level of 200 and above, because once we get to 250, it's very hard to control people. Why do you think that is? Because people at this level, like I said, they're not going to give in to the polarization. So it's going to be hard to get people worked up about politics that are at 250. It's going to be hard to get people, you know, feeding into the fear of COVID if they're at 250, right? This person has a quiet confidence about them. They know who they are. They're not swayed by all the external noise going on. And so this can be very threatening for, you know, the powers that be, or the powers that were. So now let's move up to 310. 310 is willingness. So this is when you kind of, it's similar to that state of accepting what is, but it's almost like you get to this point where you're just available to whatever life presents at you. It's like you become this natural helper. Your ego is not playing a role so much in your life anymore. So you're not really worried about what job you take. You're more just happy to be of service in whatever way, you know, you're being called. And people at willingness, they often, because they're so optimistic and just so happy with what is, and they're not, you know, they don't care what kind of job they do, they're just happy to be helpful and to be of service and, you know, to do whatever that they feel called to do. It's almost like just because they are like that, they're actually being rewarded for that attitude. Like people tend to like people like that, you know, because they're helpful. It's like people want to give back to people like that. So there's like this general recognition, appreciation that you're receiving, and they tend to contribute a lot to society because they're not worried so much about their ego and them getting ahead. They're almost just contributing to the whole, and by the laws of nature, giving and receiving are one. So because you're more interested in service to others, naturally you just keep receiving more for yourself at the same time. That's kind of how it works. That's 310, which is a level of willingness. Then you move up to 350, which is acceptance. So this is even higher than 250, which is neutrality. We're still operating at the heart, but once you get to 350, it's really like, okay, now you accept life as it is. Like now you've really, like, you're at this point where you've let go of victim consciousness. You believe that you're the creator of your reality. Like you've really let that go, that, you know, life is happening to me. You've really accepted like life is happening for me, and you make peace with that. And again, it's just a higher state of not being polarized by what's going on in the outside world. You're not polarized by conflict within yourself and within the outside world. You have an acceptance of yourself, but also of everyone and everything. So for example, during the whole election that took place in the US, it was very polarizing. Someone at 350 is not going to be polarized by that. Whoever gets elected, they're like, okay, you know, whatever. I'm sure there's a higher purpose for this, like this, what is, like what is will be, and they trust that life is unfolding perfectly, and they're not resisting that. There's no resistance, they're just accepting what is. So that's the level of 350. It's also a level of forgiveness. David Hawkins speaks about this level being a place where major transformation can take place, because it's really when you step into perhaps create a consciousness where you understand like you're not a victim, and you take responsibility for everything in your life. That's why I say forgiveness kind of plays a role into this, where you let go of the stories that maybe you've been telling yourself since you were young about your parents or your abusers. Like you really let all of that go, and you realize like, what role am I feeding into this, you know, and not to self-deprecate, but to release you, to free you from that polarization within yourself. So then from there you move up to 400. So now we're moving to the throat chakra. So this is very like high vibrational stuff that we're getting into, because we're moving up the chakra system past the heart, so into more of the spiritual centers. And so 400 is seen as reason. So this is where David Hawkins says that this is where a lot of Nobel Prize winners like Albert Einstein, they sit at 400. People that are able to receive like really complex amounts of data, and they're able to comprehend that data. Like Albert Einstein, like he did a lot for humanity. He said the shadow of 400 is that people can get so stuck in the intellectualization of theories and comprehension and, understanding philosophy or conceptualization. They kind of get stuck in that and they kind of miss the bigger picture, right? But it is something that is very high vibrational, and people at this point have done a lot for humanity, like Albert Einstein. David also explains that transcending this level at 400 is very uncommon, and only 4% of the world's population will transcend 400. So it's actually very rare to get above this 400 level. The next point that we get to is 500, the level 500, and like David said, David Hawkins says that only 4% of the world's population will get to the level of 500, and the level of 500 is love. And when I talk about love, I'm not talking about, all the Valentine's Day and romantic love and Hollywood movies and blah, blah, blah. It's really unconditional love, like getting to a point where you are experiencing every day unconditional love, the love of source, which is unwavering, it's unchanging, right? And isn't it kind of sad that only 4% of the world's population will truly sit in that, in that awareness? But what's amazing is it's possible to do that, right? And that's not to say that we can't have experiences where we calibrate at 500, right? A lot of people that do plant medicine or have, breath work, can, I believe, reach these really high states of bliss and unconditional love. And, that can help us, motivate us to seek this higher state of consciousness, in our everyday lives. David explains that 500, this state of love, this is a way of relating to the world which is nurturing, which is forgiving, which is supportive. It's really operating from the heart, right? It's not from the mind. It's just love is emanating from you. It's very healing to be around people that are in this vibration, in this energy. And it's also the level of true happiness, as David explains in the book. Now, if we move a little bit above that, we get to 540, which is the level of joy. So David Hawkins explains that love at a higher level becomes just more and more unconditional, and it kind of blossoms into this inner joy. So it's almost like this childlike. You see this with a lot of masters. They become very childlike, like they laugh all the time, they smile and they giggle. And it's like life becomes less serious as you move up the scale, because you're in this state of just love. And I don't know, I've had spiritual experiences. I think about a time just recently I did a pretty profound breathwork session, and I moved a lot of anger. And once I had moved that anger, I just went into bliss, and I was just in this state of bliss. I was lying there just, oh my God, just in so much peace. And then after that, I started laughing. And if anyone's done plant medicines or you've had really powerful breathwork sessions, sometimes you just start laughing because I really believe you hit this place of 540 where you just experience joy and you don't even know why you're laughing, and you just start laughing about nothing. It's like, and when I did this breathwork session, I was completely sober, but it was almost like I was laughing about the trauma that I was releasing. I felt so real, like this childhood trauma that I was moving through in the breathwork session. And I got to this point where I was just feeling the unconditional love of God. And then I just started laughing because I'm like, how stupid is this whole thing? And it's all an illusion. And I was just laughing in that, and I was feeling such joy. And I think, the further up you get, you just feel this bliss for no reason. It's not like you have anything to be joyful of. You just are joyful. And it's like what Eckhart Tolle speaks about in The Power of Now. It's that being in the present moment and just seeing life as perfect and just exquisite beauty and just in awe of everything. Kind of like a baby, when a baby, just picks up a piece of paper and starts laughing, it's so in awe of life. And that's what I really believe, this state is kind of referring to. Like the further up we go, it's almost like we become children again, and we start seeing the innocence and the beauty and the wonder of life, and what a beautiful place that is to live in. David Hawkins also explains that 540 is also the place, is also the calibration point of healing, of spiritual healing. So he said a lot of spiritual healers will be at this place. And the reason for that is in this level of inner joy, unconditional love, is enormous patience. And there's also this just deep level of compassion. And he speaks about how people that experience near-death experiences will calibrate in their near-death experience at the level of 540 to 600. So you know how in a lot of near-death experiences people speak about this bliss, and they didn't want to come back, and they were just so happy and so joyful. And David explains that they're calibrating at this high level, right? So then we move into, speaking of bliss, we move to 600. So 600, we're even higher now. This is the level of peace. So this is really like the transcendence of self. You're really stepping into oneness here. It's like subject and object disappear, where the observer and that which is being observed become one. He speaks about how people that often reach this level of 600 will often remove themselves from society, because it becomes harder to interact with the everyday when you're in this level of peace, and just it becomes harder to identify with that personal self that we're so accustomed to. The lower we are on the scale of consciousness, they're really like stepping into that oneness with source. And there's a silencing of the mind, the ego chatter. And then the final one, which I spoke about, which is enlightenment, that's 700 to 1,000, and 1,000 being, like I said, Jesus, Buddha, Krishna. This is the level of enlightenment. This is the crown chakra, where you are one with source, and you know that you are divine. You know that you are not separate from God, you're not separate from others, you've transcended the ego, you're in complete oneness, non-duality. And so that is essentially the map of consciousness. So that's kind of where we're heading, and whether we get to it in this lifetime or not, it doesn't matter. The point being is, the more further you move up on the scale, the better life essentially becomes, because it's not that life is necessarily better for people that are higher up in the level of consciousness. But remember how David spoke about how your level of consciousness is your attractive field. So you're going to attract situations and events and people that resonate at that same level. So if you're at a higher level of consciousness, you're going to attract people of that same level of consciousness, right? So your friends are going to be different, your relationships, the jobs, the kind of work you do, the kind of books you read, the kind of food you eat, everything is going to change, because everything is energy and everything is calibrating at a certain point. And so the more you move up in this level of consciousness, things are going to fall away from your old life. And I've definitely found this true for myself, and I'm sure anyone on a spiritual path will know exactly what I'm talking about. When you start working on yourself and you start working towards enlightenment or self-realization, whatever you want to call it, people will drop away. Things from your past will drop away. You won't be interested in the same things anymore. I found it's very hard to be friends with the same people, not because you have any resentment towards them or any hard feelings, but it's literally like, if they're say at 150 and you're at 250, you're literally at different calibration points. Like, it's like you can't harmonize at that level. It's you're not attracting each other. You're in a different field of awareness. And so to conclude the episode, I just wanted to kind of summarize that what we've spoken about today. I think the main takeaway is that we want to reach a point of 200 and above for ourselves, and we want to encourage everyone else around us to reach that same point, because we're not going to change the world with just one person. Like, we all, like I said, need to pull our weight. We all need to be elevating our consciousness. Now, we can look at the world at large and we can see that there are a lot of countries that where there's a lot of corruption, there's a lot of people in famine, in extreme states of poverty. We have war-torn countries at the moment. And so those of us that have the privilege to maybe even listen to a podcast like this, I'm assuming a lot of you are in the Western world. I know a lot of people that listen to this podcast are living in Australia and America. Like, us doing the work to work on ourselves, to remove the judgments, to elevate ourselves from those lower states of being to an elevated state of consciousness, we are going to, in doing so, by just working on ourselves, we elevate the entire collective. We help the entire collective consciousness. Remember how I said one person calibrating at 600 is lifting the rest of humanity up. 85% roughly of the population is below 200, and those of you listening to this, I truly believe like nothing is a coincidence in this life, and that if you are coming across David Hawkins' work, even if it's just by me speaking about it, or you're feeling intrigued by this conversation, or if something's landing with you today, it's truly because you are ready for this information. You wouldn't be here otherwise. You wouldn't have listened to this episode otherwise. Like, you are here to do the work. You are here to help humanity, to lift humanity, and you do that by working on yourself. We all do that by working on ourselves, by raising our level of perception of creation, because perception, how we perceive the world, is how we create our reality. Perception is creation, right? And that's exactly what A Course in Miracles says. It's all within our minds. The power is within us. It's not out there. And so reaching that level of 200 where you start taking responsibility for your reality, I think that is just an amazing place to work towards, if you're not already at that place, or once you're there, to help lift others to that place. And that's really why I do this podcast and I do the work that I do, because I really understand the value in this work. And the more, you know, I just like sharing what resonates for me, what's helped me on my journey, and continues to help me on my journey. And I hope that it can inspire someone else who's on the same journey to, you know, reach higher states of consciousness for themselves. That is why I do what I do. And so, you know, maybe you're wondering, okay, well, how do I raise my consciousness? How do I reach these higher states towards enlightenment? I think it's pretty obvious. I think we all know the answer to that. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about being intentional about what kind of things we consume, how we start our mornings, not going straight to our phones or our emails first thing in the morning. You know, like by doing that, you're just setting yourself up for disaster. Like you're overstimulating yourself. Like, it's just, you don't know what you're going to see on that device. Like, putting the device away, going out in nature. Nature is the most amazing force. It's a neutralizer. It neutralizes your energy. So if you are feeling low vibrational, if you're feeling dense, if you're feeling heavy, go for a walk, go for a hike, go sit under a tree, cry under a tree, ask the tree, please take this pain from me. See what happens. See what happens. Take your shoes off and put your feet on the sand, on the soil, on the grass. See what that does for you. Anything that elevates your vibration. So maybe dancing, maybe playing, going out. You know, yesterday after my acupuncture session, I went on the swings for a little bit. Even 5 minutes just playing on the swings helps me to elevate my mood. Listening to spiritual teachers, you know, anything. For me, when I study A Course in Miracles, if I listen to a lecture on A Course in Miracles or a podcast on A Course in Miracles, immediately it raises my vibration. It takes me out of victim consciousness. It helps me perceive reality from a different lens. Meditation is huge. I start off my morning every day by meditating. Prayer, every day I finish my day by praying, right? Gratitude practices. We know there's so much science that proves that gratitude elevates our consciousness. Having fun, smiling, you know, just practice smiling. See if for one day you can smile at people, you know, just smile at everyone that you encounter and see if that does not help you elevate your vibration. Just try it. Having fun, playing. Go see what children do. Go for a run. Go, I don't know, I said playing on the swings. Even playing with children can really elevate your spirits, you know. What else? I think healing is a big one. I think let's not bypass the healing work and that aspect. You know, I mentioned before about that breathwork session. Once I had moved that energy of anger, I just went into a state of bliss. So let's not forget about the importance of healing. So whatever that means to you, seeing a therapist, you know, breathwork sessions, plant medicine, listening to podcasts, journaling, meditation, whatever the thing, going to women's circles. There's so many healing modalities out there. Find what works for you. You can use a range of them like I do. Heal, work on your trauma. Talk about the things that caused you pain in the past. Work on ways to regulate your nervous system, right? Find some tools. Have some tools in your toolkit. You know, all of us have trauma. All of us have experienced pain in our lives to certain degrees. And all of that is there, I believe, as a catalyst to invoke growth in us. And, you know, eating healthy, that's a big one. Like getting sunlight, so many things. So there's some suggestions for you. That's kind of everything I wanted to share today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know it's a long one, but there's so much to get to. Highly recommend David's work, so Power vs. Force, or any of his books. It's really, really transformational for myself, and I highly recommend. And I really thank you for being here and just doing this work on behalf of all of humanity. So thank you, and I will see you next week, my loves. Take care. Mwah.